Just the first thing to start, if you could please state your name and the year you were born.
George M. Sudderth III, August 31st, 1953.
Okay.
Yes, I'll be 70 in 2 days.
Oh, well, happy early birthday.
Yeah.
And how long have you lived in Blowing Rock?
My entire life.
Great. Do you know, were your parents from Blowing Rock as well?
My parents were from Blowing Rock. My mother grew up and was raised and grew up in Coffee's Gap. My father was raised across from Bass Lake. That was their home place. My grandfather, to make a long story short, had gotten a scholarship from Moses Cone to go to the University of North Carolina and get a degree in engineering. And when he came back, somehow or another, he was the superintendent for Moses Cone, and the home place that they lived in was part of that. And he wound up getting that from Mrs. Cone. Now, I don't know the particulars of it, but I learned that a few years ago. So he was raised there. Mm-hmm. So yes, both my parents were raised there.
And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was George M. Sudderth Jr., and my mother's name was Lilac Ellen Coffee Sudderth.
And what did they do for work around here?
My dad was the public works superintendent for Blowing Rock. My mother was just a stay-at-home. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she had her hands full.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, how many children were there?
2, my brother Steve and I. So.
Y'all were enough.
Yeah, we were a handful. She probably worked harder than my dad did, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so your grandfather, that was the super at Moses Cone, what was his name?
George M. Sudderth, and he was mayor 2 different times in Blowing Rock. He was mayor in the early 1900s and moved to Winston-Salem, and that's where my dad was born. And he was working for Wachovia in Winston, but he went to law school while he was there, and he had already graduated in 1903 from the University of North Carolina and got a degree in civil engineering. And he moved back to Winston. He got to tinkering with banking because he was running People's Bank in Blowing Rock when the Depression hit. But anyway, he was mayor early on when he was younger, and then in the early 1920s he was mayor again, right after he moved back to Blowing Rock. My father was born in 1919, April of 1919, and shortly after that he moved back up here. But my grandfather was raised where the Sandy Flat picnic area is. My great-grandfather at the end of the Civil War moved up here and homesteaded that. He had married a Nelson from Nelson's Chapel, and he moved up here, and they homesteaded right straight across the road. We're right there at Sandy Flats, where the picnic area is, and that side of 221. He farmed that.
Mm-hmm. And so then they were there when the Cones came and bought all that other...
Well, I think the Cones were already there. Okay. I'm not sure. Obviously, I wasn't around then, but yeah, so it was at the end of the Civil War. Now, I'm not sure exactly when Moses Cone purchased that. But at some point I don't know if Mr. Cone was still alive when my grandfather was superintendent over that, or I don't know, but he served a brief stint there. But he primarily, for years and years, did surveying around Blowing Rock. In fact, after he passed away, even when my dad passed away, we had all these surveys that he had done, and we finally took them to town hall. People were calling us, and we're like, look, we don't know. So we just took everything he had done to town hall, and we told everybody, you just need to go there and get it. So, but he timbered, he owned 6,000 acres from 221 across the parkway down where Price Park Picnic Ground is. And he timbered all that during the Depression. And then shortly after that, he sold it for $1 an acre. And from what I understand from my dad, he realized he made a mistake shortly after he sold it. But he literally owned 6,000 acres in there. So.
Wow.
So that's kind of the background of my family. My grandfather, on my mother's side, he did nursery work But he was one of the early, what you would call a botanist, I guess, because he could take an apple tree, and he had one apple tree in his yard that he had grafted and done. I think he had 5 different species of apples on that one tree, but that was his forte. He was really good at that.
Did you get a chance to meet your grandfather?
Oh yes. In fact, my grandfather Coffee tried to teach me to fly fish. He was a outstanding fly fisherman. And then my grandfather Sudderth, they both passed away when I was about 10 years old. So I had a chance to meet both of them and get to know both of them.
And what was your grandfather Coffee's name?
James Madison Coffee.
And then, do you remember your grandmother's?
Yes. My grandmother Sudderth was Cora Blair, and she came from the bottom of the globe, where China Orchard is. That was where she was raised. And my grandmother Coffee was Mamie Gregg Coffee, and she was raised out 221.
Do you remember anything about them?
I know my granny, she could cook really well on a wood stove. I used to love to spend the night out there, and she'd fire that wood stove up. And even in the summertime, it was hot, but she could cook. And she kind of stayed at home. And my grandmother Sudderth had broken her hip, so she liked to read a lot. But she went to school. She graduated. They had her class picture. She was one of the early classes in the Appalachian Training Academy. She had graduated from there, which is now Appalachian State University.
So do you remember anything that your grandmother Coffee that you said was the good cook?
Well, she was a homemaker, and they had a little roadside stand on 221, and my grandfather would sell honey, and he was a beekeeper as well. He would sell honey, nursery, plants, trees, rhododendron, all kinds of that, and she would work in that. So my grandfather Coffee had a cider mill. I remember I loved that, be with him when he would do the apple cider. But the Yellow Jackets in the fall, they would eat me up, but I didn't care. And then killing hogs. My dad got with them, and that was kind of a family affair. We killed hogs. So that was an experience. So they lived the old way. They didn't have a bathroom with running water. Now the southern side did have running water.
But yeah, they lived closer to town.
Yeah, they were in town.
So then, where were the Coffees? Where were they at?
Where Holloway Mountain Road is, just past that on the left, the 221 kind of goes around. He had several acres in there, so that's kind of where they lived.
Yeah, I mean it's still very isolated today.
Yeah, now they sold. When my grandmother, she passed away in the late 60s, and the family had to sell everything to pay off some of her bills. But my grandfather used to live there and go down to a place called Racket Creek and fish. And he would fly fish down there and feed it. That's how he fed his family during the Depression. He farmed and did what he could do like everybody else. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And just, such incredible skills and heritage that you have.
Yeah, but they were the old ways. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it, the old ways.
Yeah, I mean 1960, and so I know there's very common for people to still use wood stoves.
Well, they were born in the 1800s. I mean, but all 4 of my grandparents were 1870 to 1880 birthdays. So
just incredible the amount of change they got to see. And that's very interesting too that your grandfather was the super for the Kona State and the civil engineer and banker and mayor, and then that y'all have kind of continued working for the town and in public services like that as well. So you've got a bunch of your families from here, and then so growing up, did you attend the Blowing Rock School?
yes, went to Blowing Rock Elementary School, and The high school consolidated. I think my class in '71 was the fourth class to go all the way through Watauga High School. But yeah, I remember the old high school because when I was in first grade, we would go to the auditorium and places, and then just being a little kid, I was like, wow, and I still remember the echo in the halls, the old wood floor halls, and yeah, it was an experience.
Were any of those teachers, did they really stand out to you that you had at elementary school?
All of them had something special. My first grade teacher, Miss Whitener, she was one of my favorites. Miss Yoder was another. We had a Miss Cannon. We had two Miss Hollers, Miss B. Winkler. But Miss Whitener, I kept up with her after I grew up, and I left Blowing Rock, and I became the utilities director for the town of Boone. And Mrs. Whitener lived in Boone. Her husband had passed away, and she had retired. But the town was looking to purchase some land, and come to find out it was on her. She owned the property for a water tank. So I had an opportunity to visit with her several times, and she used to come through the drive-thru and pay her water bill, and she'd always ask about me, and if I was there, I would always take a minute and talk to her. So, but yeah, the Miss Critcher, several of them, they were all special in their own ways.
That's wonderful. Just that I can't remember the names of any of my teachers from elementary school, but everybody I've talked to here.
Miss Beach was another one. She was my fourth grade teacher, and when we graduated from high school, where we became seniors, she always took her class and had a party at her house. And all of her students that were seniors in high school and getting ready to graduate, we all would go to her house, and it was just kind of a little get together. And her husband ran the Appalachian Theater, so it all interconnected.
Well, it's just nice because it's the small town. It's like you see everybody and people being involved.
And I kept up with Miss Beach because they had a little group that would meet at Hardee's on 321, and they would have their breakfast there about every morning. And if I ever wanted to see her, I'd just go by. I'd time my break long. Go by and catch up with them just a little bit. So.
That's nice. So were there any, you were one of the lucky people, you grew up in this area. It's like got to have your childhood here. And I'm just curious, so like how did you and your brother play? Like would you play?
Dangerously. We would leave home where Broyhill Lake is now. We always call it Mayview Lake. And we would spend summers down there fishing. And we lived close enough to where when dinner or supper was ready, my mother would go out in the yard and yell at us. And we were close enough, we'd hear and we'd come. But we rode bicycles, we'd come to town, we played in the park, and we lived at the swimming pool. Our dad, town employees, their families didn't have to pay. We had a seasonal pass, and that was one of my dad's responsibilities was the pool. But all the town employees it was kind of a little perk for the town employees. But my brother and I lived there. I know I lived there, and then until I started playing Little League baseball, and then that took up some of my time too. And then we played in the woods. Places now where houses are being built or have been built, they used to be our playground. We played football down here where Meadowbrook Inn is. That was an open field and it was sloped one way, and that's where we played football on Sunday afternoons. And we played tackle football with no equipment. Like I say, we played dangerous.
On a slope, too.
Yeah, it was kind of sloped, and we had an apple tree for one goal line. I remember my brother kind of had a collision with it. He went up for a pass, and he was really proud of himself, but when he came down, he slammed into the apple tree. Addled him for a little while, but he was all right.
Were there any, any trails or, places that y'all would regularly go? I've heard heard some folks just, we talk about rambling all around the hills and the hollers.
We would go down, we were close to Thunderhole, and the trailhead's up across from the horse show grounds. And we would walk and we would go down there and camp. There were levels. You would go down and there were levels, and they were level, and we would go down there and camp.
What was that?
It's called Thunderhole. It's a national. Right now, it started. The trailhead's up at across from the horse show grounds, and it comes out down at China Orchard where my grandmother was raised. It goes all the way into the Globe.
Wow.
And comes out in Upton. So yeah, those trails out there kind of interconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we used to roam all over that.
So what church did y'all
Tended Rumpel.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there my entire life. In fact, where the education building is, there was a little white cottage. It was our youth building. That's where we had youth. And in the 60s, they decided to build the education building, so they tore that down and built what's there now.
And did you have Sunday school with Miss Cannon?
Miss Cannon, I remember well. That was one of the highlights. She really didn't do Sunday school. She always had what we term now as the children's service. And she had these little felt drawings, and she would tell a Bible story. And she had a board that she would attach these felt figures to, whether it was animals or people. And she would tell a Bible story, and she would tell about somebody and then put it on the board. So I remember her well, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that just seems like she made a huge impact on a lot of the children around here.
She did, and again, she would do it now she would go back in the wintertime, but we would have service in the sanctuary, in the stone sanctuary in the summertime, and in the winter we moved over to the Keys Chapel. And when she would come up in the early part of the year, before we didn't have heat in there, so she would come up, and her first bits and then her last bits before she went back for the winter were done in the canon or in the Keys Music. Well, it's Keys Music now, but the Keys Chapel. And then through the summer months, she would do it in the sanctuary. And I remember sitting on that floor just when I was 3 and 4 years old, watching her put that together. She did it very well. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us remember it.
Yeah, so in the winter, would y'all build a fire in the...
No, we didn't use the sanctuary. We just used the Keys Chapel.
Okay.
There were probably 50, 60 people total that would go to church there. So now they had in one corner, there was it's gone now, but they had a place for a wood stove, but it's since been taken out. Mm-hmm. I think back before the Keys Chapel was built, and I'm not sure when it was built, that's where they worshiped. So yeah, they had it was either coal or wood, mm-hmm. and it was in the left-hand corner up front next to the pulpit. But I remember the what they call a thunder mug, or the flue sticking through the wall right there, mm-hmm. when I was a kid. Now since then they've put a furnace in, and they've taken that out, and so.
So I've also heard people talk about like dancing, like that there would be public dances.
They had street dances over behind the park where the fire department is now. Mm-hmm. They would shut that street off. And when we were growing up early on, they had a pavilion on the backside of Wallingford Street where the tennis courts are behind the fire station. And it was a covered area. And the snow in 1960 collapsed it.
Wow.
So, but it was called a pavilion, and it was all along Wallingford Street as you go in behind the park, and where the tennis courts are, and what was the fire department. I think Parks and Rec have got it now. So yeah, but I remember it collapsed in the 1960 snow. And from then on, they would close Park Street down, and they would have a dance there. Or they would close it down when they did the tennis courts later on, and they had dances on the tennis court themselves. Mm-hmm. and it kind of spilled over into that. But yeah.
So that's really nice that there would be those public gatherings.
Yeah, some of them got a little crazy. But
yeah, what do you mean?
well, there was a few fights and things like that.
Yeah, people always the same. Right?
Yeah, but all in all, back when I was I'd got my driver's license about 68. Sometime along about then, they quit having them. They had a few after that, but so I kind of lost track of it because my interests were going in other directions. After high school, I really didn't pay much attention to some of that stuff.
Well, just before we start talking about after high school, so the 1960s blizzard. So
Yeah.
you remember that?
Yes, I was in the first grade. And my dad being the public works superintendent, they were moving a lot of snow. And I remember Bill Green, who was the police chief at the time, when they would try to have school, my dad would ask Bill to pick me up. Since I lived in town, I didn't qualify to ride a bus. And my mother couldn't get out because of all the snow, and Bill would take me home. And I remember riding in a police car. That was kind of wow. For a first grader, you know. And then in the third grade, I broke my arm in the park. A boy knocked me out of a swing. I won't say who that was. We were playing kind of rough. And I broke my arm, and Miss Hollers had my arm. She had a scarf on, and she had my arm in a sling. And we were crossing Main Street to go back to the school to call my parents, and George Baker, who was a state trooper, and his son Jim Baker, and I went to school. We were in the same class. It was a small town, so George asked her what was wrong, and she said, so he took me to the hospital. And he said, well, I know his dad, just go ahead and call him, he can meet me up there. So they took me up there, and my arm was broke, and they put a cast on it. So anyway.
Well, it's just nice. It's like, but people, you look out for each other.
But they had snow piles so high. I remember we would climb up on the snowbank there on Main Street at the park, and we could sit up above the traffic lights.
Wow.
Yeah, they had that much snow, and there were places that you could see where they had tunneled. People did it just for giggles. They would make tunnels just to get into their house. It would be like an archway. Now, they didn't have it all the way, but they would have an archway. Kind of made you feel like you were in the Arctic or something. Well, the blizzard of '93 was my worst one because I was utilities director in Boone, and we always helped the street department. And I went into work on Saturday morning and came home Monday night. So, yeah, we moved right at 60,000 cubic yards of snow off King Street and piled it up in the Coleman lot where the current Watauga County Library is. So we moved a lot of snow there.
Yeah, that's when the National Guard had the airdrop.
Yeah, well, they were airdropping then, but they also airdropped in the '60s too. I remember one story that came out about some farmer complaining they dropped a bale of hay on his cow and killed it. And they called him and asked him if he needed more hay. He said, no, you killed my cow with the last bale drop you did. So they meant well.
So you graduated Watauga High, and then did you go to App State? Or
No, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided, rather than waste my dad's money to go to school for something that I wasn't going to do, I decided just to wait. And I worked for a local building contractor, Owen Coffee. I worked for him, and I learned a lot of skills. I mean, I'd taken carpentry in high school, and it just kind of furthered that because I thought, if nothing else, I can build my own house, which I wound up doing with some help. But until I could figure out what I wanted to do, and I graduated in June of 1971, and I worked for Owen that summer, and then in October, Doug Townsend was the police chief, And he asked my dad if I would be interested in working part-time as a dispatcher for the police department, because he mainly needed help on the weekends. And my dad asked me, and I said, sure, why not? And I really enjoyed that work, wanted to get out on the road. And in fact, in 1973, Appalachian State University hosted the first BLET class, which is basic law enforcement training.
Okay.
They ran it through Caldwell Community College, but we did it at the student union at Appalachian State. And Robert Cooper was a police officer here, and myself attended it. It was 6 weeks. Both of us graduated, but I also attended with Lieutenant Willie Watson from Boone PD, Steve Edmonston from Boone PD, who was graduated from high school with me, and others, Sergeant Frank Guy, a lot of people. But it just never, I don't know, something just didn't quite feel right about it. And Bill Foster, who was running the water treatment plant, passed away. And I thought, well, there was certainly more money than what I was making with the police department. I was making $600 a month. And so I applied for it. And my dad, it kind of put him in a bad light, but he laid the applications out for the city council. He said, I want to be out of this one for those reasons. And so they voted unanimously to hire me to take his place, because I knew I would go to various schools paid for by the town, hydraulic schools, bacteriological. When I got my Class A certification, I had the equivalent of a civil engineering degree. Now, I didn't have the English, the math, and the things that they required, but I had all the hydraulics, I had all the bacteriological, I had electrical. You had to know a little bit. I think there were 20 subchapters in the certification manual that you tested out, and you were licensed. Class C was the first step, Class B, and then A. And then I went into wastewater treatment and started getting those certifications. So I didn't go to App State, but I did go to NC State, Caldwell Community College, Wilkes Community College, and the University of North Carolina, getting these certifications. And I know Western Piedmont Community College started wanting to do an AA degree in water treatment and basically pull you back in once you had your A and just do the math and stuff, and then you would have a 2-year degree. But I just never saw any need for it. Mm-hmm. And I left Blowing Rock in 1980 and went to work for Appalachian State University. When I left here, I was the chief operator at the water plant and wastewater plant. But it was not going well, and I had an opportunity to go work at ASU water plant, a much more professional staff than what I was having to deal with here. And so I took the opportunity, because then I could continue my education, because in that there were courses in laboratory that I was just starting to have a hard time with. The powers that be in Blowing Rock, they didn't see the need for this, although I saw it coming down the pike. Mm-hmm. I was talking to them about grease ordinance and things like that, and they didn't want to hear it. And I finally just said, that's it, I'm done. I can't, I know it's coming. And sure enough, they'd been behind the 8 ball they got behind the 8 ball. But I went to ASU and I worked there for 2 years, and Boone built their water treatment plant. They were bringing it online in 1982. And so Marvin Hoffman, the town manager, had always had stopped at Blowing Rock when I worked over here, and he knew I ran a water plant. And he started courting me to come to leave ASU and come there. And he just named me a salary that I couldn't turn down, so I went there. And in the meantime, I was still doing volunteer work in Blowing Rock. I was on the fire department. I joined Blowing Rock Fire Department in December of 1972. I was a charter member of the Blowing Rock Rescue Squad because they wanted the fire department to do it well. The fire department didn't want to be a part of it at that time, but several of us said, I told them, I'll give you 2 years. And the call that got me, my dad had a heart attack and passed away, and I was on call. And they got me just as we were leaving the squad building, but after that, it just really wasn't. But I did continue in the fire service, became a fire service instructor in the early 80s, and taught for the Department of Community Colleges for 15 years. I was the first of three. I was one of the 3 first live burn instructors certified in the state of North Carolina. So I did all that as a volunteer while I was doing my other job. And around 1984, I was asked to take over the wastewater plant as well as the water treatment plant in Boone. So I started up the water plant from scratch. Boone before just pulled water out of a lake, untreated. It was not good. So then I took over the wastewater plant, and about 1986, the city council pulled me in and wanted to hire me as their first utilities director. They wanted to consolidate the entire water and sewer system, plants, lines, utility billing and accounting, and engineering. So I accepted it once we came to a negotiated salary, and I retired in 2003. I was young when I retired, but I made a lifestyle change decision because I watched my father have a heart attack at 56 from the stress, and I was headed down the same road. And I had 32 years because of my early years with the police department. I could retire, and I retired when I turned 50 with 32 years in the state retirement system. And then I worked with a friend of mine, and so I've done a lot of different things. And I left Blowing Rock Fire Department in 1990 after 18 years, and went to Boone and finished out my time. But the last 5 years that I was at Blowing Rock, I was the fire chief. Yeah, well, the wastewater treatment plant, I spent 10 years researching treatment processes and equipment. And so when we hired an engineering firm, I pretty well handed them the design. And the water plant was already done when I got there, but we maintained it. We didn't let it go downhill. We stayed up with it.
And were they always over by the Greenway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We made an engineering magazine. They had what was called a trickling filter plant that didn't work well in this climate because wintertime killed all the bacteria off. Now, it was cheap to operate, but your effluent was nasty. The design that we settled on was the tertiary treatment, which we filtered it, and we added about 2,800 pounds of solids a day that we took out that were going in the river before. And one of the things that I benchmarked, there was a low water bridge where you go into the wastewater plant. You could look upstream and see a gray streak coming down it with the old plant. With the new plant, you saw a clear stream coming down the middle where the rest of the creek wasn't so clean. So we cleaned it up that much. Raleigh didn't believe, they thought we were fudging our tests, so they sent a guy up, and he set a sampler and watched it all night long. And when he left, he said, "You weren't lying, were you?" I said, "No." And they got back to Raleigh, and I got a letter from him, said, "Keep it up."
No, that's great. It's wonderful how you were able to I like with your sharing your story, how it's like, well, you didn't know what you wanted to do right after high school. And so it's like, well, let me figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you're able to get just all of that on-the-job training and education.
Yeah, and the places that I worked for pretty well paid for it. But see, when I worked for the police department, I got all kinds of training with them. When I was in the fire department, I got all kinds of training there, from Caldwell Community College or Malin Tech or wherever, for everything from fire cause determination to, again, hydraulics. You got into all kinds of fire science. I could have gone to the University of Maryland and just taken the English courses and come out of there with a degree in fire science with all the quote free training that I got, and nobody paid for that. The community college system, if you were a member of a fire department, there was no charge for you to take these courses. And a lot of them, I got into fire command classes, and all of that worked back to my profession, being a supervisor, or I got management training. And so it all, like I say, it all worked out. And I didn't like a lot of the things that I saw in Boone with their wastewater plant, even in Blowing Rock. I used to fuss at them over here. You can be an environmentalist, but you got to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so I took the job, and I got in there, and I got my hands dirty. And we designed and built a system that cleaned it up. In fact, when Bill Clinton was president, they came in and they established a New River as outstanding resource waters because of some of the work that we had done in cleaning it up. Mm-hmm. So, and it's still going on today, and that's what I'm proud of. I left that legacy. That's one thing. They got a lot of little problems, but they don't have that problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's nice. It's like you came in, you saw their issues, and then when you left, you saw that those had been fixed, improved, and that you got recognition for it.
No, didn't get recognition for it, but that's okay. I never cared. Recognition's something I've never cared about.
Mm-hmm. Well, at least the state saw that, what y'all weren't lying about your numbers. What years were you with the Blowing Rock water treatment?
Well, I started with the water treatment in 1970, spring of 74.
Okay.
And, but again, I as a kid, I had been with my dad. And I had heard these terms, and I had watched him work, and that's how I knew the history of the first wastewater plant in Blowing Rock was built in the early 60s, about 61, 62. They had two septic systems, one below the Mayview Dormitory and one on the south side of Green Park Hotel. And the town I know my dad would say, well, I've got to go check on the guys there. They didn't have weed eaters back then. They used mowing size to mow around these and keep them clean. And the one down at Green Park, they always had problems with copperheads. And that's how I remember those. And they hired Pete Abernathy, I think was the engineer's name, out of Hickory. And he designed, in fact, the first wastewater plant, which is down behind Shops on the Parkway. And it took the load off the septic tanks, and then they built a lift station down here behind the Antlers Bistro, and all the sewer lines fed into it, and then it pumped it up to a manhole up here on Main Street, and then it went to the wastewater plant. So all that was done at one time, and they shut down the two septic tanks that the town was on. But later on, after I left over here, they always had a lot of odor problems in the summertime. And once I got through all my school and education, I told them what was wrong. It was a roughing plant. The type of plant that they had was designed to take wastewater to a certain level, but after that they had to have more treatment. They had to have a way to dispose of their solids, whether it be a belt press or whatever. They didn't do that, so the solids kept building up, and we wound up with a food to mass imbalance. A wastewater plant's a lot like your digestive system. You get it out of balance, you get an upset stomach, same thing there. And I never could get them to understand it, and that's when I just decided, you know what, they were giving me a hard time. I'm like, I'm done, I've got to go. I was feeding peroxide into the system, hyper oxygenating it, because it was starved for dissolved oxygen. And they just didn't want to fool with it. I'm like, fine. But people in town would fuss. You could smell it on Main Street if the wind shifted just right. So anyway, I think they finally got that part addressed anyway. In Boone, we set up a solids handling system. We had drying beds, and when we built a new system, I had researched an Atlas stored dryer, which it was a pasteurization process that took your liquids from, typically your solids were, when they came off of a drying bed, whether you land applied them or whatever, about 80% water and 20% solids. Well, we were able to take 90% of the water out, so it was a powder. And now it's in big demand for tree farmers. You don't need a permit. In Boone, we were having to permit land, and it stunk to high heaven. And you know, it worked real well on cow pastures, but you couldn't put it on anything that, you know, you were raising food. So it couldn't be used for agricultural purposes other than hay for cows, secondary. The Class A, on the other hand, once it's pasteurized and you do your testing for bacteria regrowth, we had none. We went 3 years on a cycle and had no regrowth in the first batch that we ran through. So we went from about 700 tons a year of solids down to about 20 tons a year. And the tree farmers the last time I talked to the wastewater plant superintendent, they've got a waiting list.
Wow.
So we were able to dispose of it, and it didn't cost the taxpayers a dime.
Yeah.
And we were putting it back into the environment in a clean state.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's incredible.
So,
and
so I was proud of that process.
Yeah.
I kind of came up with that.
Yeah, and I mean, just hearing about the old wastewater plant here in Lone Rock, people, you know, it's the 60s, but they're using hand sites, and they have to worry about copperheads. Just, you know,
Well, that was the water. So that was just the mowing, yeah. And they even mowed the sides of the road with mowing sides. Mm-hmm. They didn't have salt spreaders. My dad they didn't even have salt till about the late 60s. But I know when it would get icy, they would take a dump truck and he would put two guys on the back, and they would broadcast sand with shovels off the back of a truck. They didn't have salt spreaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they didn't have asphalt like you know it now. They had chip paving, and they had a big tank of tar over there across from my house, and they would chip pave. They would squirt the tar out and then come along and sling it out with a shovel. Mm-hmm. You know, DOT's gone back to that in a lot of the secondary roads now.
Yeah, I've seen that like Shoals Mill.
Yep,
and
yep.
Stuff.
And you got to be real careful when they first do it, because it's slick.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and it's loud too. Yeah. So then, since you've retired, do you volunteer any, or still are you active in any organizations?
I shoot. Well, I work Lone Rock Cares out of the church, or I did, but I decided I wanted to play, so I started shooting competition trap, and got fairly good at it. In fact, 2 years ago, I was put in the North Carolina Trap Shooting Hall of Fame with the championships that I'd won over the years. So I do that, and I do a lot of work there, but
is that something you got into after retirement?
After I retired, yeah. Yeah.
Would you like shoot and go hunting when you were younger? Is that
Oh yeah, people would die if they knew. We used to hunt around the country club. I mean, there was nobody there. And not just us kids, but grown-ups. Sonny Klutz had dogs. We had dogs that we would hunt the horse show grounds. I mean, we would leave my house or we would park over at the horse show grounds and there were a lot of areas around there and we rabbit hunted. I've rabbit hunted as close to town as up by Bistro. There were no people that lived here and we were safe, we were careful. But trap shooting is, and then I deer hunted for years, but then I got into clay target shooting and I really enjoyed that. Met a lot of great people, and made a lot of friends in it and traveled quite a bit. So, but I did most of my volunteering when I was younger. My body is just not, I'm broke down. I wore too many steel air bottles on my back, putting out fires around here. So
yeah.
That was in the days that before they came up with the fiberglass air bottles that are 20 pounds lighter, 30 pounds lighter. What's the old saying? If I'd have known I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself 40 years ago. But I still do some things, but not a lot. But.
Well, I like how you said that, you worked enough, you're ready to play, and that's very important. And it's wonderful that you found a passion to really that you
and I'm 22,000 targets away from having my 250,000 registered targets.
Wow.
So that's a lot of shotgun shells.
So then I'm interested now, kind of just, were there any funny things that happened, like when you were with the fire department? You remember, any funny calls?
Oh, we had all kinds of funny things happen. I know one year, New Year's Eve, it was foggy, and the parkway, the maintenance, where the park rangers and all their maintenance out at Sandy Flat, that caught on fire. Well, these were the early days of the volunteers, New Year's Eve. You had to have a lot of discipline not to drink. Well, we had an individual fireman who, I was on the end of a hose line they had a big pile of fertilizer in there and we were trying to keep it wet. And all of a sudden the nozzle went limp and I looked around and this individual fireman had shut my hose line. He said, "Well, we got it out, we're rolling hose up." I said, "We ain't got it out." He had a little too much to drink, and the last time I saw him that night, he was taking a nap in the front seat of one of the rescue squad's crash truck that was sitting out there. So, and there were a lot of other things. And serious stuff too. When I was fire chief, we had the Glenwood condominiums burnt down here at Sunset and 321, and it was, wind chill was 55 below zero. The thermometer was 20 or 25 below, and we put over 1 million gallons of water on it. And fortunately, we had 7 people that I sent to the hospital. They kept one that fell on some ice or something, but we tried to manage it and keep people warm. So there were some really serious times. And it was serious, but it was funny down here where this little Methodist church is at Aho Road was a trailer park at one time, and we got dispatched for an explosion down there. And there were 2 house trailers that were completely demolished. And as we got to checking, there was a young boy, it just took the roof off. In fact, if he had been sitting up on the couch when the explosion happened, he would have been decapitated, but he was laying on the couch. And as it turned out, there was a refrigeration technician that lived in one of the trailers, and he had a Suburban. And he had a gas leak he had phosphagen gas in there, which is a refrigerant, but he also had acetylene torches, and both of them happened to be leaking. Well, those two gases, when they mix, they explode, and that's what happened. But we were very lucky. Now, it was kind of funny because the way that kid was acting, he was like, but I didn't do any, you know, there were humorous parts of it, but the Suburban was blown down to the floorboard. The seats were gone, the front bumper almost went across 321. Now it had been 4-laned, but there was an oak tree up there and it wrapped around the oak tree. And so, but it was serious, and it damaged several trailers, but it absolutely destroyed 2 of them. And a lot of other things. I mean, it was just, we had a call one night and there was sleet everywhere, and we told one boy was bringing a vehicle, and I told him, be careful. He got on the radio and he said, I'm wrecking. I'm like, get off the radio and drive. Yeah, it was. And another thing in the fire department, when I was fire chief, well, before I became fire chief, Doris Green always answered the phone, because until Bill Green was killed, they didn't have dispatchers. You know, the police officers here went through Boone when they had radio reception, but they had nobody to take emergency fire calls. And so the fire department set up a phone line with Doris Green, who lived upstairs of what was Story's Soda Shop at the corner of Sunset Drive and Main Street. She lived upstairs, and she worked for Coleman, but primarily she lived up there. But even after they decided to get 24-hour-a-day dispatchers, Doris still had the same fire phone, and that was her home phone. The fire department paid for it, and that was part of the deal. She could use it as just a regular telephone, but it also was listed as the emergency number for Blowing Rock Fire Department. And I'll never forget, my dad was fire chief, and I was fairly young when they had a major fire in Boone. Doris called my dad and said, we just got a call from Newland. They needed Blowing Rock Fire Department over there. And Daddy said, well, I don't know if it's a prank call or not. We don't want to take off over there. They didn't have radios like we've got now. And he got an operator to get him somebody in Newland. And he said, just anybody that'll answer a phone. The operator finally got somebody and said, well, I've got the fire chief from Blowing Rock on the phone with you. And Daddy said, do y'all have a fire? And he said, the whole town's burning down. Daddy said, that's all I needed to hear. But that's the way it was. And finally, when I was working for the police department and I was on the fire department, I said, I would be working and the phone would ring, and I'd pick it up, and it was a social call for Doris. Or every once in a while, I would get a call on the police line say, we've got a fire, and the phone line was busy for the fire department, so they called the police department line. And I told the fire department, I said, guys, we're going to have to do something. And we recognized her at the Centennial. I was fire chief during the Centennial, but before that, we paid for her phone. We put her a house phone in and got that emergency line pulled out of her. But she could blow the siren from her house. We had switches from out where Bill Lentz's service station, which is across from 221 where all those shops are now. It used to be Blowing Rock Hardware. They had a button out there, they could blow the siren. They had a button at Darcy's, they could blow the siren. I think when Hayden Pitts had his gas station, they had a button out there. They had a button, and we were all the time, if we get a rainy, foggy day, one of those buttons was going to short out. In fact, another funny story, I was washing a fire truck one night out in front of the fire station, which is where Town Hall is now. And I shorted the button out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the fire siren went off, and my dad came in there. That siren was just blaring. I didn't know you could turn the breaker off. He showed me which breaker to turn off. So, yeah, there were some interesting things. That siren caused a lot of stir.
It is such a great small town thing. It's like, oh, Doris. She's
Yeah, and when I went on the fire department the first year, we only had 10 calls. And of those, I don't even think we had a working structure fire, maybe a car fire. And they didn't have the fire alarms. And, the police department had alarms that were all of it, but they would always go check first. And finally, they went and checked one, and it was almost fully involved. And we're like, look, when you get a fire alarm, don't go check them.
Mm-hmm.
Dispatches. I had a guy calling me at the house when I was fire chief. Mom, got a chimney fire. I said, I'll be there in a minute. I'm bringing the cavalry. And so I pulled in and went up in his attic. And sure enough, it had breached the brick and gotten out. And about that time, my first engine pulled in. He said, you brought him? I said, yeah, I brought him. He said, I'm glad you did. I said, I can get this job being stupid. So, yeah, it was, and people a lot of times would downplay. It's not that bad. Yeah, it's running the walls. The old balloon style construction. And we learned a lot by building, my building that I did when I was in high school and right out of high school paid dividends in my fire service career. Everything I did expanded into the next thing that I did.
So you said balloon style construction?
Yeah, balloon style construction is where you have 20-foot long 2x4s, and it goes from the ground all the way up to the second floor, and they nail the floor joist on the side, and it's called balloon construction because there's air gap all the way from the ground floor all the way up to the attic. And fire, if you get a fire on the first floor, it runs all the way up. Mm-hmm. That's why building codes call for fire stops. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we called it balloon style construction. And another funny thing is the new people that would come in and get on the department, we always responded to a call, well, that's the old Henson farm. That's the old so-and-so's house, or because it was based on who we knew had lived there at one time or another. Because that's the way we learned it from the old guys that were on the department. When I went on the department, the average age was about, I think they figured it up, it was 59 years old. And they decided, we're going to have to start getting some young guys. They had old guys in there. You put somebody in, they blackballed. 3 votes and you didn't get on. It was local politics, and we couldn't get anybody on. And finally, we sat there one night. We had 2 openings and couldn't get anybody voted in. And that's when we changed the way that we did business.
So were the votes from existing members?
Yeah, they were the old guys, old World War II generation. And
I mean, that's tough. It's really hard work. And then,
well, they would just stand back and let it burn. They didn't. In fact, the chief, when I went on the department, and I won't say who it was, didn't know what a Halligan tool was. And so I started studying books.
A Halligan tool?
A Halligan tool, which is a multi-tool used for forcible entry into a building. It's a simple, and when I got on there and I said, what's a Halligan tool? Where's that at? We don't have one. I don't even know what it is. So that's when I started taking fire classes. Introduction to firefighting, 42-hour, and then I really got interested in teaching, and I had a skill for that. And in fact, had an instructor from Cumberland County that told me, you really need to get your certification. So they had a class, and I got my certification.
And you said that you were teaching up until 1990, right?
I quit teaching in 95.
Okay. Did you teach, was that just for fire, or did you ever do any teaching for water quality?
I did some in Morganton certification classes, at Western Piedmont Community College. I taught some of their regional schools down there, and I also taught at AB Tech, Asheville Buncombe Tech. I did some classes up there when they had the regional school there. I never did any in Raleigh because they always tried to centrally locate because they didn't want to have to pay for travel rooms. I did the work for free, but I couldn't quite come out of pocket, for motel rooms and that. So they stayed regionally for that. And since I was close enough to Morganton, I could drive back and forth. And the town was good enough to recognize it. And most municipalities, if they have an employee that's asked to teach, it's just part of the job. So, yeah. Now, the Department of Community Colleges, I taught those classes at night and was compensated for that. And I taught as far away as Burnsville. I taught over there a lot for Mayland Tech. And I taught for Caldwell Community College. So, yeah, but I taught for 15 years from about 1980 to about 8 to 95, so.
That's great you're able to share that knowledge that you
Well,
had.
that was one of the things, the way I was treated when I got on, it was like nobody knows anything. They're going to get somebody killed. In fact, the Glenwood, I knew we had truss construction. Nobody knew how long that building had been burning, and I knew we were going to have a pancake collapse in that building at some point. And I pulled the crews. We were trying to get a handle on an interior attack, and something in the back of my mind says, we need to clear that building. And I cleared the building, and the captain with Boone Fire Department was standing at the command post chewing me out for doing it. And about that time, boom, the whole building it just sat down. And the way I stopped that fire, I saved the end offices that were closest to 321. They had an empty, unfinished, and I stuck a master stream in it and collapsed the floor and stopped the fire right there. The wind was blowing so hard that it was pushing the fire through. We couldn't stop it. We had crews on the backside keeping it off that motel, which was Appalachian Motel then. I'm not sure what it is now. But I had some complicated stuff, but my training kicked in and I was able to do it. The days of the good old boy stuff, it had to be over with. We could, and that was one of my beefs with the way even back then the fire department, they had to have their elections every year. And if you made enough people mad, and so, it just, I never felt like politics was, but that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And I went to Boone and finished out because they had a paid chief and paid staff, and I was there anyway, and so it just made sense to finish out there. And that's what I did. Once I got my time in, I had 25 years, so I just bailed. I'm like, that's long enough. Typically, when I was doing it, a volunteer lasted 5 years. So I did 5 lifetimes of a volunteer firefighter. And when I was chief here, I spent 40 hours a week doing fire department stuff. I would get all home from work, I would eat, and if I wasn't teaching a class, I would be up at the fire station doing a report, doing something. In fact, we finally computerized stuff to where we could, so I went from, in fact, when I first went on the department, we didn't do fire reports. And I became an officer, and I suggested we start doing fire reports, and they dumped it in my lap. So I found a company that had forms, and I ordered the forms, and we did a little fire report. Because insurance companies were starting to require them. And so that was kind of when we started coming out of the dark ages, so to speak.
Modernize the fires.
I go back, one thing I did want to say, I don't know if y'all been told this, but when my grandfather was mayor the second time, was when they had the big fire on Main Street, most of Blowing Rock burnt down, and they didn't have a fire department. So they formed a fire department, and my grandfather was working, he was the manager of the bank, and he loaned the town of Blowing Rock $2,500 to buy their first fire truck, which was a little American LaFrance didn't have a cab on it. It was open cab fire truck. In fact, we still had it when I joined the department. And then they went to a 1940 Ford. It was the last year they made them until World War II ended. And they had a 1940 Ward LaFrance. It was an American, no, it was a Ward LaFrance. And that took over. And then in 1961 or 62, they bought the next fire truck. And then the little one kind of rotated out. It was still there, but they never used it. And then it kind of disappeared after that. The town got rid of it, I don't know. And see, the fire department built what's town hall now. Mm-hmm. There was a plaque on there. The fire department paid for that building to be built in 1953. And the town took part of it over as office space, and the Chamber of Commerce was out front. We're planning inspections, receptionist. Now, that was a Chamber of Commerce. And then the town offices were the next couple offices, and then the last one on the left was the police department, and that's where I worked out of. Mm-hmm. And then the fire station was off over where the current administration is.
Mm-hmm. That's just amazing. Yeah, I hadn't heard about your grandfather, loaning the money to get the.
And I saw the loan papers to that one time. But I don't know what happened to them. In fact, when I went to work at the water plant down here, we had the original flow charts. The water plant started up in February of 1939. That was a WPA project from Roosevelt, started from the Depression. Mm-hmm. And the town of Blowing Rock's first potable water system, they had 2 wells. Both of them were over off Cone Road. One was where the existing Public Works building is, and the other well was across from my house. And I think there was another one in town somewhere, but they used those wells, but the manganese in them it ruined people's laundry. And so the town built the water treatment plant through the WPA project, and I don't know how it was paid for, but I had the first flow chart. The plant ran 4 hours, and it was in February of 1939.
Wow. And the WPA just did so much for this area. I mean,
they did. And I wish now that I would have kept that one chart, because I said, I wonder how far back then. It went all the way back to 1939. I said, that's when the plant was started up. I think they started it up at 8 o'clock in the morning and ran it till noon. But when this plant that's there now, I was running the system when we built this new plant, or the plant that they're using now. We just could not keep up. We were running the plant 24 hours. It was a 500,000 gallon a day plant, and the demand was way over that. So I saw Blowing Rock expand out of that.
Yeah, and really, really grow a lot during your lifetime. So you really touched on every question I had here. The last one that I kind of got that I just like to ask everybody is like, so you've lived here your whole life, and what about this place is special to you? Like, what makes you want to stay and, this is your home?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm ready to move. I mean, seriously, Blowing Rock has changed to the point where I'm not against it. It changed, but there's nothing really holding me here now. Both of my children, one lives on the coast. He's a public safety officer. And my daughter's a Presbyterian minister, and she's currently at a Presbyterian church close to Pinehurst. And her kids are pretty well grown. My son's kids, he's got them from 2 years old up to 15. But I've lived here all my life, and I'm not going to completely uproot here. My wife likes the winters here. She likes the falls. I've gotten to the point where the weather here just does not agree with me as much. I just like to try somewhere else. Not that I'm going to be gone. I want to come back here. I've got property here, so I will come. But I would just like to sample something else. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with it. It's just I've been here and I've been out in the world too, and I just like to go somewhere where you know, just to try something different. Where that would be, I don't know. We're exploring that right now. My wife's retired and I'm retired, so she worked in banking for 40 years. So
Is your wife from here?
She was born in Hendersonville. Her parents moved here in the 60s. Her name's Evelyn Cantrell. And her father taught for the community college system. He taught down at Caldwell Community College, and her mother was an elementary school teacher in Sawmills, and they lived in Blackberry. But so she's been here a long time, but she wasn't born here. But she's local. She's local enough. Well, my family, all of my cousins, I've got second cousins, first cousins that I grew up with that left right out of high school. They went to college, married, and they live in either Marietta, Georgia. There are two that are just like sisters to me. One lives in Charleston, the other one lives in Marietta. My brother lives here, but you know, but there's nothing that really holds me here as far as that. I mean, it's home, and it'll always be home. But I'm just ready to maybe look and go somewhere. I might stay somewhere 6 months and kind of be a snowbird, you know, get out of the harshest of the winter and then come back. I don't know. We're just playing with it right now.
Yeah, it's a great place to be in.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be buried down here no matter where I go. So
down here, where's down here?
Yeah, Woodlawn Cemetery.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad kind of set that up. I'll never forget. We were down there mowing. We used to mow the cemetery. We'd mow our plot where his mom and dad, well, his dad passed away. He was the first one. They had to clear all that so they could bury my grandfather. And we mowed it. That was part of growing up. My dad handed me a lawnmower, said, I'm taking you to, we're mowing. And somebody stopped and was talking to him, said, there's quite a few graves here. And my dad said, yeah, the sad part is I knew all of them. So he was doing the public works thing, I think, when they first started that cemetery. He took the job in 1950, I think, and then passed away in 1975. Had a heart attack. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, George, I appreciate your time so much and you sharing so much.
You're welcome. Well,
it's just been wonderful to hear about this and just how much your family has served and helped the community of Blowing Rock and Watauga County.
Well, we just helped it grow as much as we could and did our thing. We all have just a short amount of time to do it. And like I say, I did most of my volunteering in my younger days when, fire department, rescue squad, that was a lot. And I was part of the turn when we went from a Class 8 to a Class 5 fire department, which dropped everybody's insurance rates. We put a lot of time and effort into that. But we tried to give back to the community.
Was it Class 8?
We were a Class 8, the ISO Insurance Services Office. They have an insurance, they rate fire departments. Mm-hmm. And back then, Blowing Rock was a Class 8, and that was a kind of a standard. That was not a real good rate, but it wasn't a bad rate. It means you had a fire department, and they were okay, but so we did things with equipment purchases, worked with the town to get some water system upgrades, and then we went to a class. We dropped from a Class 8 to a Class 5. We were the first department in this county to do it. We beat Boone to a Class 5. But then Boone, once they went paid, they were able to. But then Blowing Rock started going paid too. So, and I don't know what happened. I've just lost. I did my time.